The coffee was hot in my mug, the old porch swing steady beneath me. Just another quiet Texas morning settling over the Morgan Ranch, same as it had for more mornings than I could count across my 60 years. Then the peace shattered. A high-pitched engine whine ripped through the calm, sharp and angry, followed by the spitting sound of gravel kicked up at speed. Down the length of my long drive, a cloud of dust exploded like a gunshot, and through it charged a white BMW, gold rims flashing ridiculously in the sun, barreling towards my house like it had a damn death wish. Before I could even set my mug down or push my aching knees to get myself out of that wicker chair, the car skidded to a halt not 30 yards from my porch steps, spraying dirt. The driver's door flew open, and she emerged. She moved like she owned the ground she walked on, which was ironic, considering she was trespassing. Tight red business suit that looked agonizingly out of place against the backdrop of dusty fields and weathered fences, heels stabbing aggressively into the gravel. Her face was set in hard, impatient lines, and she was waving a stack of papers above her head like a battle standard as she stormed right towards me, completely ignoring the clearly posted "No trespassing, survivors will be prosecuted" signs my granddaddy had put up half a century ago. "You need to vacate this property immediately," she screamed before she was even halfway to the steps, her voice shrill enough to make my teeth ache. "I bought it fair and square. This ranch is mine now." I just blinked, the sheer unadulterated gall of it hitting me like a physical blow. Mine? This place wasn't just some parcel on a map. My name is Arthur Morgan, Art to Friends, retired Sergeant Major. 22 years I gave the army, saw enough of the world's ugly side to earn the quiet I found right here on the spread my great-granddaddy carved out of the wilderness over 120 years ago. This land breathed Morgan history. My great-grandfather built this very house with his bare hands. The deed, the real one, solid and indisputable, sat locked tight in the heavy iron safe inside, not 50 feet from where I stood. This ranch isn't just property recorded down at the county courthouse. It's a living history book bound in barbed wire and weathered wood. Every fence post tells a story. Every scar on the barn door holds an echo. And Sarah, my Sarah, loved this view from the porch more than anything. Used to sit right here beside me, her hand resting warm on mine, watching the sunset paint the fields in strokes of gold and purple. Her roses, the stubborn crimson climbers she planted near the old barn with her own hands, still fought their way skyward every spring, vibrant and beautiful, just like her memory. Losing this place wouldn't just be losing acres and a house. It would be severing the last anchor, tying me to her, losing the echo of her laughter on the wind. Her eyes, cold and assessing, scanned the porch, the house, the wide-open land beyond with blatant dismissal. I could almost hear the gears turning behind them. Old ranch, stubborn old man, probably broke, easy target for whatever shiny, soulless homeowners association nonsense they were planning across the highway. Whispers I'd heard in town lately about progress, about developers buying up land, suddenly sharpened into focus. Those unfamiliar cars I'd seen slowing down near my turnoff, maybe they weren't lost tourists after all. An old soldier's instinct for trouble brewing, ignored for too long, now screamed red alert in my gut. I stood up slowly then, deliberately unfolding my full 6'2" frame, letting the years of army discipline settle back into my posture. I made sure I towered over her. I pulled on that old ingrained calm, the one that had kept men alive in firefights she couldn't even imagine. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice low, even, and carrying clear in the morning air, "you are trespassing. I suggest you turn around, get back in your expensive car, and leave my property before things get unpleasant." My hand, hanging loose at my side, instinctively clenched into a fist. This wasn't just about legal papers or some faceless developer. This was about Sarah's roses just starting to bud by the railing, about the sunset view she cherished, about the legacy entrusted to me. The thought of this sharp-edged woman, smelling of cloying perfume and naked greed, stomping her high heels over Sarah's memory. It ignited a cold, hard anger deep in my gut. She wasn't just trespassing on my land, she was trespassing on my life. My words hung in the suddenly still morning air. Eleanor Vance's perfectly sculpted face tightened, her eyes, cold moments before, flashing with a brief flicker of surprise, quickly replaced by contempt. She actually laughed, a short, brittle sound devoid of humor. "Unpleasant," she echoed, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder. "Oh, please, you're just some old man squatting on property that's no longer yours. I have a buyer lined up, a very motivated buyer. Either you sign the relocation papers I have right here," she jabbed a manicured finger towards the stack in her hand, "or I'll simply have you removed. Consider this your only generous offer." The gall of it, the sheer dismissive arrogance, left me momentarily speechless. Before I could form a response sharper than the curses forming in my mind, she spun on her heel, heels digging defiantly into the gravel, and stalked back to her ridiculous car. The engine roared to life, and she sped off, leaving another cloud of dust and the faint, cloying scent of her perfume hanging offensively in the air. She didn't stay gone long. Maybe 3 days passed. Just enough time for the dust to settle and a fragile semblance of peace to return. I spent the time patching a section of fence down by the creek and trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in my gut. Then, one afternoon, the white BMW was back, crunching up the drive with the same entitled arrogance. This time, she wasn't alone. 2 men in dark, ill-fitting suits climbed out with her, looking like cheap muscle, trying too hard to appear professional. They didn't bother with pleasantries. "You were warned, Mr. Morgan," Vance said, a smug smile plastered on her face. She stayed near her car this time, letting the 2 suits advance towards the porch. "These gentlemen are here to finalize the paperwork. We strongly advise you cooperate." One of the suits, a thick-necked fellow with eyes too close together, pulled out a cell phone and pointed it directly at me. "Subject is hostile and uncooperative," he announced loudly, narrating for the camera. "Refusing lawful instruction." Lawful? I crossed my arms, planting my feet firmly on the top step. Anger, cold and sharp, sliced through the anxiety. They were trying to provoke a reaction, build a phony case. Not today. "You're trespassing," I stated, my voice level, carrying the parade ground authority I hadn't used in years. "Again, this is private property. Turn around and leave, now." The suit kept filming. Subject is making verbal threats. "Threats?" I almost laughed. "That's a warning, son. There's a difference, and since you're recording..." I reached into my own back pocket and pulled out my battered smartphone, hitting the record button. The suits blinked, momentarily thrown off script. Vance's smug smile faltered for a second. "This is Arthur Morgan," I said clearly into my own phone, panning slowly to capture their faces. The BMW, the license plate. "On my private property, the Morgan Ranch. Date and time are being recorded. These individuals, Eleanor Vance and 2 unidentified males, are trespassing after being previously warned. Any actions they take, any threats they make, will be documented and turned over to Sheriff Brody's office." The thick-necked suit lowered his phone slightly. He glanced back at Vance, who hissed something under her breath. The other suit, leaner and looking distinctly uncomfortable, whispered urgently to her. She glared at me, defeated for the moment, but radiating malice. "You'll regret this, old man," she spat. "I doubt that as much as I doubt the legality of whatever papers you're waving around," I replied calmly. They turned, shuffling awkwardly back to the car. But as Vance got in, she deliberately kicked over one of Sarah's rose bushes near the porch railing, sending dirt and broken stems scattering across the wood. A final petty act of vandalism that felt like a personal insult. I watched them drive away, the dust settling once more, but the peace felt permanently fractured now. This wasn't just business, it was becoming a vendetta. That night sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the old house sounded like an intruder. Every shadow seemed to move. I found myself checking the locks on the doors and windows, something I hadn't felt the need to do in years. I went to the gun safe, pulled out my old service pistol, a Colt M 1911, heavy and familiar in my hand. I field stripped it, cleaned and oiled it with methodical care, the familiar ritual calming my nerves slightly. It wasn't about wanting violence. It was about being prepared for it when it seemed determined to find you. The thought of the cost started to weigh on me too. Not just the emotional cost, but the practical. If they kept this up, there'd be legal fees. Michael Sterling, my lawyer and an old army buddy, wasn't cheap, even if he gave me the friends and veterans rate. Repairs to the ranch if they escalated beyond kicking flower pots. How long could I sustain a siege like this? The ranch barely broke even most years. My savings weren't inexhaustible. The weight of 120 years of family history suddenly felt very heavy on my shoulders. Could I be the Morgan who lost it all? My answer came less than a week later. I was down at the barn, trying to coax the ancient water pump back to life, when I heard the rumble. Not one car this time, but several. Wiping grease from my hands onto my jeans, I stepped out into the harsh afternoon sun and felt my heart sink. There she was again, Eleanor Vance, stepping out of her BMW like she was arriving at a gala, but behind her, pulling up in a cloud of dust, were 2 pickup trucks and a beat-up van. At least a dozen people spilled out, some in suits like before, others in construction vests holding clipboards, a couple even carrying surveying equipment. They spread out without a word, heading towards the barn, the cattle pens, the fence line, like locusts descending on a field. Vance marched towards me, a triumphant, predatory glint in her eyes. "Good afternoon, Mr. Morgan," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We're here to begin the preliminary inspection." I laughed then. Couldn't help it. A low, deep chuckle that started in my chest and rumbled out. "Inspection? Inspection of what?" "Of my property, of course," she replied brightly, waving a hand towards the unfolding activity. "As per the purchase agreement you signed, we are authorized to inspect the premises prior to finalizing the closing." "Purchase agreement I what?" The words were insane. "I haven't signed anything! You are trespassing!" I yelled it louder this time, making sure every single one of her hired hands could hear it. "All of you, get off my land now!" Most ignored me, clearly following Vance's orders. A few clipboard carriers hesitated, glancing nervously between me and their boss. One guy started unreeling a measuring tape along the fence line. They were acting like they already owned the place, taking inventory. And I knew, instinctively, that if I laid a hand on any of them, they'd have the sheriff out here claiming assault faster than I could blink. It was a calculated provocation. I grabbed my phone again, finger hovering over Sheriff Brody's number. "You step 1 foot further, Vance, and I'm calling the law," I warned. She merely smirked and pulled a single sheet of paper from a portfolio. She waved it dramatically in front of my face. "No need." "It's all perfectly legal. Your signature," she said smugly, tapping a spot on the bottom of the page. "Right here." I snatched the paper. It was a photocopy, and a poor one at that. But there, at the bottom, was a scrawled signature that bore a passing, superficial resemblance to mine. Sloppy, wrong slant, but close enough to be deliberately misleading. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was outright fraud. "That's not my signature," I said firmly, my voice tight with anger. Vance's smirk widened. "Really? Looks like it to me. Looks like it to the county clerk, where it was filed this morning. Tell it to the judge." She turned away dismissively. "All right, team, let's get measurements on that barn." Filed? This morning. It was a deliberate setup. A con designed to overwhelm and confuse. Just as I was dialing Brody's number, shouting erupted from near the cattle pens. Ethan, the neighbor's kid I hired part-time, a good lad, barely 18, was arguing with one of the suits who'd gotten too close to the herd. The suit gave Ethan a hard shove. The kid stumbled back against the old wooden fence. Crack! A rotten section of the fence gave way, and the cattle, already spooked by the strangers, the shouting, the unfamiliar vehicles, saw their chance. They surged through the gap. A tide of terrified beef, hooves thundering, eyes wide with panic, straight towards Vance's scattered crew. People screamed, scattering like quail. Clipboards and hard hats went flying. Surveying equipment was abandoned. Vance shrieked and dove behind her precious BMW as Zeus, my big, temperamental prize bull, lowered his head and charged across the yard, snorting and bucking like a rodeo nightmare. I sprinted towards the barn, whistling sharply, trying the calls the herd knew, desperately attempting to regain control, but it was too late. Pure chaos exploded across the ranch yard, and right in the middle of it all, Vance's shiny white BMW sat parked directly in the path of my angriest bull. Zeus, seeing the large white obstacle, didn't hesitate. He lowered his massive horned head and hit the driver's side door with the force of a battering ram. Crunch! The metal crumpled like tin foil. The side mirror snapped off. The front wheel buckled sideways with a sickening groan. The car alarm started blaring hysterically as the whole vehicle rocked violently on its suspension. Vance shrieked again, scrambling out from behind the wreckage, one of her expensive heels snapping as she stumbled through the dirt and cow manure towards one of the pickups. Her crew wasn't faring much better. Some had sprinted blindly into the open fields. One of the suits, in a moment of sheer panic, actually dove headfirst into a horse trough, sending water splashing everywhere. It would have been comical if it wasn't so damn dangerous and infuriating. I kept whistling, low and sharp, using the calming calls Sarah used to use. Slowly, gradually, Zeus and the others began to settle. They weren't mean animals, just frightened by the invasion. After a few tense minutes, I managed to get most of them herded back through a side gate behind the barn, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. 30 years since I'd last seen active duty, but handling chaos under pressure. That the army teaches you deep in your bones. I walked slowly back towards Vance and her bedraggled, manure-spattered crew, huddled near their remaining vehicles. Her expensive perfume was completely overpowered by the smell of dust, fear, and cow dung. Pure failure radiated from them. "You still want that inspection?" I asked, my voice calm, but carrying clear across the suddenly quiet yard. Vance opened her mouth, closed it, her face flushed crimson under its layer of expensive makeup. Good. Just then, the welcome sound of sirens grew louder. 2 sheriff's cruisers finally bumped up the driveway, lights flashing. Sheriff Brody stepped out of the lead car, a tall, wiry man I'd known since he was a rookie deputy. He took in the scene, the wrecked BMW, the busted fence, the scattered, disheveled city folk trying to look innocent. Me standing there covered in dust, and his eyebrows shot up nearly to his hairline. "Evening, Art," he said, giving me a small, weary nod. He looked tired, older than his years. Maybe those rumors about pressure from county commissioners friendly with the developers weren't just rumors after all. "Evening, Brody," I replied, tipping my hat. "Got ourselves a little trespassing situation here. Seems my bull took exception to their parking job." Brody sighed, turning to Vance. "Ma'am, perhaps you can explain what you and your associates are doing on Mr. Morgan's property without his permission and apparently antagonizing his livestock." She recovered quickly, maybe too quickly. "This man is squatting on my land, Sheriff," she snapped, waving the crumpled photocopy. "I purchased this ranch. I have the paperwork filed with the county." Brody glanced at me. I just nodded towards the house. "Deeds in the safe, Brody. Original copy. Been in my family since 1905. You know the history." He pinched the bridge of his nose, looking thoroughly fed up. "Ma'am," he said, turning back to Vance, his voice taking on a harder edge, "unless you have a court order explicitly granting you possession or access, you are trespassing. Filing paperwork doesn't negate Mr. Morgan's existing deed until a judge says otherwise. And from the looks of this, he gestured at the wrecked car and broken fence, you're also causing significant property damage. You and your people need to leave. Now! Her face flushed an even deeper red. This is a misunderstanding, she stammered, changing tactics. A simple boundary survey. We'll leave. Oh, you'll be leaving, all right, Brody said grimly, after my deputies take statements from everyone involved regarding the trespassing, destruction of property, possibly endangering livestock. You're lucky nobody got seriously hurt out here today. One of the suits muttered something about lawyers. Brody cut him off. Lawyers can sort it out later. Right now you're all getting citations for trespassing. And Ms. Vance, the owner of that vehicle, he nodded towards the mangled BMW, might want to talk to her insurance agent. We'll need a tow truck out here. It took over an hour for the deputies to take statements, write reports, and issue citations. Vance and her crew finally piled into their remaining vehicles and drove off in disgrace, leaving the crippled BMW behind like a monument to their failure. Brody lingered for a moment, shaking his head as he watched them go. These city developers, he muttered, more to himself than to me, think they can just roll over folks who've worked the land their whole lives. Not this time, Brody, I said, managing a tired smile. He chuckled dryly. Maybe not, but Art, you need to be careful. Get Michael Sterling on the line if you haven't already. This feels like it's gonna get uglier. He's already on it, I assured him. Thanks, Brody. He tipped his hat and left, his cruiser kicking up one last cloud of dust. The ranch was quiet again, but it was a tense, wounded quiet. The next day, Ethan and I spent hours repairing the fence under the hot Texas sun. The kid was quiet, shaken by the previous day's events. Sorry about that, Mr. Morgan, he said finally, handing me a post-hole digger. That guy, he just came right at me. I didn't mean for the fence to break or the cattle to get out. I clapped him on the shoulder, sawdust sticking to my sweaty hand. Wasn't your fault, son. Not one bit. They had no right being here, pushing people around. You stood your ground. He looked relieved. We worked until sunset. The physical labor a welcome distraction, but the unease remained. I installed a couple of cheap motion sensor floodlights near the barn and the house that evening, feeling foolish but necessary. The legal threat felt more real now, more insidious than the physical confrontations. Filing forged documents? That took planning, Malice. The proof of that malice came 3 nights later. Deep in the moonless dark, around 2 a.m., a sound jolted me awake. Not the familiar creaks of the old house settling, but a metallic scraping sound coming from the direction of the barn. My heart hammered against my ribs. I grabbed the old M1911 from the nightstand, checked the chamber by feel, and slipped out of bed as silently as a shadow. Peeking through the curtain, I saw nothing but darkness near the barn, but the sound came again. A distinct groan of metal under stress. Someone was trying to pry open the heavy barn door lock. The barn, where I stored the tractor, the feed, tools, in several sealed trunks containing Sarah's old photographs, letters, things I couldn't bear to sort through, but couldn't dream of losing. Adrenaline surged, cold and clear. Calling Brody now would take too long. They could be gone or do irreparable damage before he could get out here. No, this was on me. I bypassed the porch, slipping out the back door and using the familiar darkness, the trees, the old stone wall as cover. Circling around towards the side of the barn, I heard hushed, urgent voices now. Come on! Hurry up! Get this damn thing open before the old man wakes up! Too late for that, buddy. I took a deep, steadying breath, stepped out from behind the water trough and thumbed on my heavy maglite flashlight, its powerful beam cutting through the night, pinning 3 figures caught right at the barn door. A crowbar clanged loudly as one of them dropped it in surprise. Freeze! The command ripped out of me, pure drill sergeant instinct. They froze, startled rabbits caught in the glare. One was tall, wiry, the other 2 looked younger. Jumpier. Step away from the door, I ordered, my voice hard as flint. Hands where I can see them. The tall one hesitated, his eyes darting towards the fallen crowbar. A stupid, split-second decision. He lunged. Before his hand was halfway there, the M1911 was out, leveled squarely at his chest, the flashlight beam holding his eyes. I said freeze, I growled, the sound low and dangerous in the night air. He froze mid-lunge, terror washing over his face as the reality of the situation hit him. His hands shot up. Okay, easy, man. One of the younger ones started to edge towards the darkness, towards where I assumed their vehicle was parked. Bad idea, I snapped, swinging the pistol and light towards him instantly. You move one more inch, friend, and you'll be regretting it for a long, long time. He froze too, hands shaking visibly. Good. Keeping them covered, I used my boot to kick the crowbar further away into the dirt. I backed them up slowly towards the fence line near the road. Sit down! They sat, huddled together, fear radiating off them. Who sent you? I demanded. The tall one licked his lips. Well, we don't know what you're talking about. Just looking for scrap metal. Liar! I cut him off flatly. Just then, his gaze flickered nervously past me, maybe towards the house, and he muttered something under his breath, almost inaudible, but my hearing was still sharp. Sounded like, Vance said he slept heavy. Confirmation. Cold certainty settled in my gut. I kept the pistol steady with one hand, pulled out my cell with the other, and dialed Brody's direct number. Brody, I said when he answered, his voice thick with sleep. Art Morgan, you're going to want to come back out to the ranch. Got 3 live ones for you this time. Caught them trying to crowbar my barn. There was a groan on the other end. You're kidding me, Art. Wish I was, I said grimly. A string of curses followed, then a promise he was on his way. The wait felt eternal. Crickets chirped, an owl hooted mournfully down by the creek. The 3 men sat silent, eyes shifting nervously. These weren't random thieves. Vance was escalating, trying to intimidate, maybe destroy property, hoping I'd break. Over my dead body, I thought, grimly. Finally, the blessed flash of blue and red light swept down the driveway. Brody and another deputy climbed out, weapons drawn but low. Got him right here, Sheriff, I said, raising my free hand slightly. Caught red-handed. Brody approached, handcuffs glinting. Nice work, Art. Maybe you should come out of retirement. I managed a small chuckle. No, thanks. Had my fill of trouble. They cuffed the 3 without incident. As the tall one was being guided into the cruiser, he turned and sneered at me. Fear replaced by impotent rage. You won't win, old man. She always gets what she wants. The mask was off. No more pretending. After they left, the silence felt heavy. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was war. And Vance had just proven she'd stop at nothing. The next few days were a blur of activity. I called Michael Sterling immediately. He started drafting cease and desist letters, exploring restraining orders. Meanwhile, I turned the ranch into Fort Knox. High lumen, motion-activated floodlights on every corner, wireless security cameras covering the driveway, the house, the barn ruins, because Brody's deputies confirmed the intruders had splashed gasoline around before I caught them. The barn raid was meant to be an arson attack. Reinforced steel plates on the door jambs. New deadbolts. Ethan helped, his young face set with grim determination. The place started looking less like a home and more like a besieged outpost. Just when I thought I'd shored up the physical defenses, the next attack came, silent, insidious, on paper. A county process server showed up one afternoon, handing me a thick stack of documents, lawsuits, plural, filed by Eleanor Vance and the shadowy development corporation she represented, accusations of ranch neglect, violations of obscure environmental codes I'd never heard of, even animal cruelty, lies, every single one, crafted to paint me as incompetent or malicious. I drove into town the next day to meet Michael at a small diner off Main Street. Neutral ground. He spread copies of the filings across the worn Formica tabletop, his expression grim. It's worse than I thought, Art. This isn't just harassment, it's a coordinated assault. They're trying to bury you in legal fees, trigger county inspections, maybe even get liens placed on the property based on these bogus claims. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. My stomach twisted as I flipped through the pages, the dense legalese mixing with blatant falsehoods. So, what do we do, Michael? He leaned forward, his eyes sharp. We fight, same way you fought every battle your whole life. Strategically, relentlessly. We document everything. Answer every false claim with facts. We file countersuits. Fraud for the forged signature, harassment, conspiracy, attempted arson based on the intruder's admission, trespassing, damages. We hit back, hard. But Art, he added, his voice softening slightly, it's going to cost, a lot, and it's going to get nastier before it gets better. You prepared for that? I met his gaze, the reflection of the diner's fluorescent lights stark in his pupils. I am. But driving back to the ranch, the weight of his words pressed down on me. Nasty. I hadn't realized how nasty yet. As I turned down the dirt road leading home, a cold dread washed over me. Ethan's old pickup truck was parked haphazardly by the gate, driver's side door hanging wide open. Empty. Ethan! I yelled, slamming on my truck's brakes and jumping out, my heart suddenly pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Ethan! No answer but the wind whistling through the fence wires. I ran towards the house, my boots kicking up dust, that old soldier's instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong. The front door was ajar, splintered near the lock. Inside, chaos. Furniture overturned, chairs broken, papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Someone had been here, violently, recently. Pistol drawn. Clearing rooms methodically like I hadn't had to do in decades, I moved through the violated space, empty. But the destruction was targeted, malicious. Then I reached the small study where I kept my accounts and Sarah's old desk. And I saw it, taped crudely to the wall, scrawled in thick black marker that dripped like blood, sell or else. My breath hitched. The message was clear, brutal. But where was Ethan? I spun, ran back outside, shouting his name, my voice hoarse with rising panic. Ethan! Answer me, damn it! Finally, a faint groan reached me, seeming to come from the woods behind the blackened, skeletal ruins of the barn. I sprinted towards the sound, crashing through dry brush and brambles, ignoring the branches whipping at my face. And then I saw him, tied crudely to an oak tree with what looked like baling twine, slumped against the rough bark. His face was bruised, lips split, one eye swelling shut. His breathing was shallow. Ethan! I fell to my knees beside him, fumbling with the knots, my hands trembling with a mixture of relief and white-hot fury. You okay, son? Talk to me. He coughed, winced. Mr. Morgan. His voice was weak, raspy. Two guys jumped me when I came back from checking the south pasture. Said to give you the message. His head lolled against the tree. Looked like a concussion, maybe a broken wrist where the twine bit deep. I got the message, son, I said grimly, finally getting the ropes off. I helped him up, supporting his weight, half carrying him back towards the house, towards the destruction they'd wrought. This wasn't about land anymore. It wasn't even just about money or greed. They had crossed a sacred line. They had put their hands on a good kid, on someone under my protection, in my home. They had turned this into something far more personal, far more dangerous. I called Brody again. No weariness in his voice this time. Just clipped. Professional urgency. Within 30 minutes the ranch was swarming. Deputies, an ambulance for Ethan, state trooper investigators. Pictures were taken, evidence bagged, statements recorded. They took Ethan to the hospital in town. Concussion confirmed, wrist fractured, but he'd be okay. Thank God. As the ambulance lights disappeared down the drive, I stood on my violated porch, watching the sun bleed into the western horizon, painting the sky in bruised reds and angry purples. Enough. No more reacting. No more defending. I swore then and there, under that blood-red sky, that I wouldn't just fight back. I would hunt down every last person responsible for this, from the thugs who'd hurt Ethan to the woman pulling the strings. I would gather the evidence, build the case, and I would make damn sure they answered for it. Not just in court. They had backed an old soldier into a corner, threatened his home, hurt his own. They had no idea what was coming for them now. I was just getting started. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford that night. After settling Ethan's worried parents who'd come to sit with him at the hospital, I returned to the ranch. I sat on the porch, the cleaned M1911 resting heavy but reassuring across my lap, watching the long dirt road that snaked towards the highway. Every distant headlight was a potential threat, every rustle in the brush a possible intruder. But the real attack, I knew, wouldn't be subtle this time. Vance was cornered, hurting Ethan, ransacking my home. Those were acts of desperation. Her next move would be decisive, probably brazen, an all-or-nothing gamble. I had Michael Sterling working on the injunction, gathering affidavits, but the law grinds slow. Vance, I suspected, was about to try and outrun it. As the first pale grey fingers of dawn stretched across the eastern sky, painting the clouds in bruised shades of purple and pink, I saw it. Not just one vehicle, but a procession. A line of headlights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom, moving slowly, deliberately down the county road towards my gate. SUVs, big pickup trucks, even a couple of rental moving vans, at least 20 vehicles in all, maybe more. Leading the pack, inevitably, was Eleanor Vance's new black SUV. Insurance must have paid out quickly on the BMW Zeus had remodeled. Behind her, the vehicles disgorged their occupants. Men in dark suits clutching briefcases, uniformed security guards adjusting tactical vests, clipboard-wielding agents fanning out, even a crew of rough-looking movers rolling dollies off the back of the rental trucks. This wasn't a sneak attack. It was a full-blown invasion, staged for maximum intimidation. I stood up slowly from the porch swing, my knees cracking in protest, but my mind felt sharp, strangely calm. The adrenaline was there, humming just beneath the surface, but it was controlled, focused. I'd spent the hours before dawn making final checks. Every camera I'd installed was recording, feeding wirelessly to a secure cloud server Michael had set up. Copies of my deed, Brody's incident reports, photos of the damage, Ethan's preliminary statement, all uploaded, safe from physical seizure. I left the pistol inside this time, holstered but accessible just inside the door. Outnumbered 20 or 30 to 1, a gun wouldn't solve this directly. No, my preparation, the truth, and maybe a little help from my friends. That was my arsenal today. I walked steadily out to the main gate, stopping just inside the fence line as the convoy ground to a halt a few yards away. Vance emerged first, dressed this time in a crisp white pantsuit that practically glowed in the dim morning light, a stark, almost angelic contrast to the darkness of her intentions. She marched towards me, high heels somehow managing not to sink too deep into the packed dirt, a fat manila envelope clutched in her hand like a scepter. "This is your final notice, Morgan," she snapped, her voice tight with forced authority, holding the envelope out like a weapon. "We have a court-filed eviction order. You are illegally occupying corporate-owned property. If you do not vacate the premises peacefully and immediately, we have authorized security personnel," she gestured vaguely towards the men in tactical gear, "to remove you by force." I didn't take the envelope, didn't even look at it. I just held her gaze, letting the silence stretch. "You done?" I asked quietly. She sneered, though a flicker of uncertainty briefly crossed her eyes at my lack of reaction. "You have no idea who you're messing with, old man. This is bigger than you, bigger than this rundown dirt patch." Behind her, the suits began speaking into radios, spreading out along the fence line. The security guards shifted their stances, hands hovering near belts that likely held more than just handcuffs. The movers started pushing empty dollies towards my gate, a clear visual threat. It was a well-oiled machine, designed to intimidate, overwhelm, and crush resistance through sheer numbers and a facade of legality. I allowed myself a small cold smile. "Funny thing about machines, Ms. Vance," I said, my voice carrying easily in the still air. "They break down real easy when you know where to hit 'em. And you seem awfully desperate for someone holding all the cards." I saw the barb hit home in the sudden tightening around her mouth. "Is this whole thing," I continued, nodding towards her assembled army, "really worth prison time, Eleanor?" Her face flushed. "How dare you! We are acting entirely within the law." She turned to the head security guy, a burly man with a shaved head. "All right, open the gate. Use the bolt cutters if you have to. Clear the property." The security team started forward, one producing a large pair of bolt cutters. The movers behind them tensed, ready to flood onto the property. This was it, the moment of breach, and then came the sound, not from Vance's crew, but from behind them, from both ends of the county road. The low, guttural roar of multiple heavy-duty engines, growing rapidly louder. Heads turned. Vance spun around, confusion momentarily replacing the fury on her face. "What the hell is that?" she shrieked, rolling into view, kicking up their own clouds of righteous dust. Came the cavalry. Big pickups, aging flatbeds, even a couple of retired sheriff's patrol trucks, still painted black and white, driven by my neighbors. Old Man Hemlock from 3 miles down, the Rodriguez family whose fence I'd helped mend last spring, Jenkins and his boys who ran the feed store in town, half a dozen veterans I knew from the local VFW post, dozens of them. They pulled up strategically, forming a solid, immovable wall of steel and determination, boxing Vance's entire convoy in against my fence line. Doors opened, and people stepped out. Ranchers in worn denim and dusty boots, veterans standing tall in camo hats, young families looking grimly determined, and there, leaning on a crutch near Jed Jenkins' truck, grinning from ear to ear despite the bruises still livid on his face, was Ethan. One by one, they stood firm, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Vance and her crew, a silent, unyielding message radiating from them. "You want Art Morgan's ranch? You'll have to go through all of us." Vance's face turned a shade of purple I hadn't thought humanly possible. "This is illegal!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "You're obstructing justice. I'll have every single one of you arrested. Every one!" I chuckled then, a deep, genuine belly laugh that seemed to rattle the very air. "Funny you should mention arrests, Eleanor," I said, just as the unmistakable sound of sirens cut through the tension again. This time, it wasn't just 1 or 2 cruisers. 3 county sheriff vehicles pulled up smartly, lights flashing, followed closely by a state fire marshal's unit and 2 unmarked sedans I recognized as belonging to state investigators. Sheriff Brody stepped out, flanked by the fire marshal himself and 2 stern-looking investigators in suits far more convincing than Vance's hired muscle. Brody didn't look weary now. He looked resolute, his eyes hard as he surveyed the scene, and then fixed on Vance. He strode right up to her, ignoring her sputtering protests. "Eleanor Vance," he said, his voice calm but carrying undeniable authority as he flipped open a small leather folder. "You are under arrest." Her jaw dropped. "On what grounds?" "This is harassment. I have an eviction order." "You have a fraudulent document," Brody corrected sharply. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false instruments, multiple counts of aggravated trespassing, coercion." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "Assault," he nodded towards Ethan, "and arson." "Arson!" Vance shrieked, genuine shock momentarily overriding her fury. "That's ridiculous! I had nothing to do with any fire." "Didn't you?" Brody replied coolly. He glanced towards Ethan. The young man took a steadying breath, supported by Jed Jenkins. "Sheriff," Athen said, his voice clear despite the lingering rasp from his injuries. "When those guys jumped me, the ones who tied me up, I heard them talking just before they knocked me out good. One said to the other, 'Make sure the old barn goes up good this time. Vance was pissed it didn't catch right before. Wants it looking like an accident.'" A collective gasp went through the assembled neighbors. The fire marshal stepped forward slightly. "That statement corroborates evidence of accelerants found at the scene. Ms. Vance, attempted arson is a serious felony." Brody didn't wait for her response. He nodded to his deputies. "Cuff her and her associates." He indicated the lead suits and the security chief. "The rest of you," he addressed the movers and lower-level employees, "stay put. You'll be questioned as material witnesses." Chaos erupted, but this time it was the controlled chaos of law enforcement. Deputies moved in efficiently. Vance struggled briefly, screeching threats and curses, her white suit getting smudged as handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. "This isn't over, Morgan! You hear me? It's not over!" she screamed as they guided her, stumbling now without the facade of power, towards a cruiser. One by one, the core members of her team were cuffed and searched. The remaining movers and agents looked stunned, lost. Their temporary authority evaporated. The crowd of townsfolk watched in grim silence, then a low murmur of approval spread through them. I stood by my gate, arms folded, watching the culmination of weeks of fear, anger, and sleepless nights. The sun was fully up now, bathing the ranch in golden light. I took a deep breath, the air suddenly tasting cleaner, lighter. The immediate battle, the fight for this piece of earth soaked in Morgan's sweat and Sarah's memory, was finally over. We had won. As the last of the sheriff's cruisers, carrying a snarling Eleanor Vance and her key accomplices, disappeared down the driveway, a profound quiet settled over the ranch, broken only by the relieved murmurs of my neighbors. The remaining security guards and movers, looking dazed and leaderless, were eventually processed and allowed to leave in their vehicles, except for the disgraced rental trucks and Vance's new SUV, which awaited tow trucks alongside the bull-ravaged BMW. One by one, my friends and neighbors came up, clapping me on the shoulder, offering quiet words of support. Jed Jenkins, the Rodriguez family, my fellow veterans, their faces reflecting a shared victory. Even Ethan, leaning on his crutch but standing tall, managed a tired, bruised grin. Then slowly, they dispersed back to their own lives, leaving me standing by the gate, the morning sun warming my face, the immediate threat finally extinguished. But the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the heavy weight of what had happened, and the understanding that the legal battle was likely just beginning in a different form. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal activity, thankfully mostly handled by Michael Sterling. Investigators, armed with warrants and fueled by the evidence gathered from Vance's arrest and the testimony myself, Ethan, and others provided, began unraveling a complex web of deceit. It turned out Vance wasn't just a rogue realtor. She was a key player in a predatory network of developers and financiers aiming to acquire vast tracts of land through intimidation, fraud, and coercion across 3 counties. My fight, it seemed, had blown the lid off a much larger operation. Other ranchers and small landowners, hearing about Vance's arrest and emboldened by our stand, began coming forward with their own stories of harassment and forged documents. The state attorney general's office got involved. It was a slow grind, but justice, it appeared, was finally sharpening its teeth. Vance and her main associates faced a raft of felony charges, their expensive lawyers suddenly finding the ground very shaky beneath them. My own legal situation resolved much faster, with Vance facing criminal fraud charges related directly to the documents she'd filed against my property. The civil suits she'd initiated collapsed like a house of cards. Michael presented my original, century-old deed alongside the evidence of forgery and the criminal investigation to the judge. It was blessedly brief. The judge dismissed all claims against me with prejudice, formally nullified the fraudulent purchase agreement Vance had filed, and issued a clear, unequivocal judgment affirming my sole, undisputed ownership of the Morgan Ranch. Holding that final court order in my hands felt like shedding a heavy, invisible weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. The land felt truly mine again, secured not just by history, but by the validation of the law we'd fought so hard to uphold. Slowly, life on the ranch began to find its rhythm again. Ethan's wrist healed, the bruises faded, and though the experience had clearly sobered him, his youthful resilience shone through. He was back helping with chores, quieter perhaps, but with a new maturity in his eyes. "Glad we showed 'em, Mr. Morgan," he said one afternoon, leaning against the newly repaired fence line, watching the cattle graze peacefully. The bond between us, forged in shared adversity, felt stronger. So did the ties within the community. Neighbors stopped by more often, not just for coffee, but to lend a hand, share news, or simply check in. The siege had inadvertently strengthened the very community Vance had tried to shatter. And one morning, inspecting the damage near the porch, I saw it. Tiny, bright green shoots pushing up from the base of Sarah's rosebush, the one Vance had kicked over in petty spite. Life, stubborn and persistent, was returning. The deep scars remained, but true peace, the kind earned through fire, finally felt possible again. That fall, we rebuilt the barn. It wasn't just me and Ethan. The call went out, and the community answered. Trucks arrived loaded with lumber donated from Jenkins's store. Neighbors showed up with hammers, saws, and strong backs. The air filled not with tension, but with the rhythmic pounding of nails, shared laughter, and the smell of sawdust mingling with barbecue smoke from the lunch tables the church ladies set up. It wasn't just a barn raising. It was a celebration, a defiant statement hammered into every beam and rafter. While clearing the last of the charred debris from the old foundation, my hand closed around something small and metallic, a severely scorched silver locket, one I'd given Sarah years ago. Empty now, fire damaged, but intact. A bittersweet reminder found amidst the ashes, a promise of continuity. Now I sit back on my porch again, coffee steaming in the cool morning air, the old swing steady beneath me. The view is the same. The wide Texas sky, the rolling pastures where my cattle graze peacefully, the horses trotting lazily down by the creek. But it's different too. The peace feels deeper now, hard-earned, paid for not just in sweat and worry, but in the fierce loyalty of community and the stubborn refusal to be broken. The new barn stands proud against the horizon, a testament to resilience. My ranch is safe. My name is clear. The Morgan legacy entrusted to me is secure. The ordeal taught me things I thought I already knew. About the value of home, the strength found in neighbors, the quiet tenacity required to stand against greed. Vance and her associates are facing years behind bars, their network dismantled. But vigilance, I know, is the price of peace. If anyone ever tries to come for this place again, they'll find out the same thing Eleanor Vance did. This land doesn't just belong to me. I belong to it. And anchored here, rooted in history and community, we are damn near unstoppable.